In this video, we're going to overview humanism. Now, humanism is similar to Hinduism in that it doesn't have a singular founder. So there's a number of areas that we could examine, and we could spend a long time examining the different threads of humanism. But we're going to be focusing in on Friedrich Nietzsche for the moral understanding of humanism, as well as a technological view of post-humanism. So to begin, let's understand how humanism is going to understand the nature of reality. Again, for something to exist, it must come out of something else. So the blue box comes out of the larger red box, and therefore the blue box exists. Now, if you recall in Hinduism, this existence was an illusion, because in Hinduism, the nature of reality was a non-dualism. There was one without a second, and that was Brahman. In monotheism, the blue box does exist, and that comes out of God. And God, that transcendent reality, was personified in both Christianity and Islam. Now, in humanism, the understanding of reality itself is monism. And monism means that there is one thing, one substance. And here we have a material monism. So all things are material. But it can be a little bit more complex than that, because then the question becomes, well, what does self come out of? If all things are just material, how can self exist? And the idea behind monism or humanism here is that the self comes out of that which is greater than self, which is potential. So self forms out of or comes out of potential itself. So what lies behind the nature of reality is potential. And so let's take a look at the nature of the problem. Again, we're going to be focusing in on Friedrich Nietzsche's perspective here, and then branch off a little bit as we go. So for Nietzsche, the problem of humanism, or the problem that we are facing, is that we are mistaken about our values and our limits. Now, the idea here is that those things which drive us, our human instincts, our animal instincts, our drives, the need for food, the need for sex, the need for curiosity, these things are naturally human. In fact, they are which make us human. And the idea here is not that we pursue them independently and without consideration of others, but we are mistaken about the nature of exchange. We are mistaken about what it means to have a good exchange, a healthy exchange, and we have limited ourselves in the nature of our exchanges, which have made us inefficient. And that is where the imperfect information lies, is that we have a misunderstanding about human instincts, a misunderstanding about humanity itself, along with this idea of what it means to be human at all. And to understand the problem a little bit more, let's go back to monotheism. So in monotheism, there is a God or a greater self that the self comes out of. So what Nietzsche perceived was that those who were in the monotheistic faiths had what he called a slave morality. And there's a number of reasons behind this that we're not going to get into. But the idea here is that they had a misunderstanding primarily of good and evil. And what he meant by that was the definition of good was to restrain power, to restrain your impulses, to restrain your visceral states, to restrain your wants and your desires. That is what he saw in these monotheistic faiths as their definition of good. And their definition of evil was to attain their desires, to get what they want through power. And so for Nietzsche, what he saw in monotheism was an upside-down morality, an upside-down value system. It was a system, he thought, that had life-negating values, not life-affirming values, but those which restricted life, values of subservience, values of denying oneself what one really wants, a negative morality. And this, he saw, led to a lot of resentment, a lot of hatred of life. And the solution in monotheism he saw was just an escapism, that one would eventually get to heaven, but in doing so, that one diminished the value of this life. And so the solution, according to Nietzsche, was that transvaluation. What we need to do was we need to re-examine what the self was. And here the idea is to take on a master morality. And in that master morality, one is going to access one's potential. That we as humans should be seeking excellence. That we should be seeking nobility. That we should be seeking to tap into our potential to become all that we are and even more than we are. And another way of saying that is that we should become our own gods. Or that we should be able to define for ourselves by God. Who is that ideal self? Why is that ideal self determined by that monotheistic view? That monotheistic view is in fact mistaken, and we can redefine what it means to be God, or what it means to be an ideal human. And so that's the idea of Nietzsche, is that we can go back and we can redefine what we are, who we are, how we're expressing ourselves to really become fully alive. So let's take an example. What about sexual arousal? In the monotheistic view, sex was to be only permitted in a monogamy, in a marital relationship. Now the question here is, well, why? Why does that drive, that visceral state of arousal, why is that only constrained to manifesting itself in that way? What about casual sex? This is a type of exchange, and if exchange leads to transcendence, why not have casual sex? And why is sex only constrained to marriage? Why is adultery such a bad thing if that is a free voluntary exchange with other individuals? Why can't we have open marriages or multiple marriages, a polygamy type system? Why is it that the self is constrained in such a way which limits the self from making free voluntary exchanges? If exchanges are that which leads to transcendence, we should be re-examining how we're dealing with all of our visceral states, with all of our limitations, with all of our human drives. Now, other limitations that we face in humanity is that we do die and that we are constrained biologically. Now, another view of humanism is called post-humanism. And the event that post-humanists are looking forward to is called the technological singularity. Now, the technological singularity is almost like the Messiah coming in monotheism or in Judaism. It is the Christ which is going to come and save humanity, but not through God, but through technology. So we've almost reached a position of an unlimited growth in technology. And this doesn't just mean computing power. This is artificial intelligence. This is robotics. This is biotech. This is synthetic biology and digital medicine. These are these exponential technologies which is really going to redefine what it means to be human. Now, transhumanism has what's called the three supers. This technological revolution or this technological singularity will bring about three areas of humanity which will redefine humanity itself. The first one is super longevity. We will eventually overcome death literally. We will be able to transcend our physical states. We will be able to use medicine in a way which can actually reverse the aging process and to live as long as we want, if that even means forever. Another super is super intelligence. We will be interconnected with technology. We will become one with technology and we'll have access to massive amounts of information. We will no longer be ignorant beings. We will be super beings in terms of our intellect. The third super is super well-being. The idea here is that our biology, our genetics are designed for survival. And so we get angry, we get hungry. Why can't we just edit out those genes? Why can't we replace those genes with patience, with kindness, with goodness? Why can't we manipulate our own genetic code to bring about a greater human experience? And you can see these three supers in humanism as very similar to the three omnis of monotheism: omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, an all-knowing, all-powerful God who is everywhere, who is unlimited. And you can see that these three supers are also specifically designed to overcome selfishness and evil, because that longevity is going to actually overcome death. We have super intelligence, which is going to overcome our ignorance, ignorance being the cause of evil, as well as super well-being, which is going to overcome and even genetically modify our visceral states, which is going to end selfishness. So here you have a literal overcoming of humanity. And so here you have in transhumanism or in post-humanism the idea that humanity will eventually give way to the next phase of evolution. We are a part of that phase of evolution, but we will become technology itself. The self will cease to be that of flesh and blood and will become technology itself, an unlimited self through technology. But we are not there yet in terms of post-humanism or transhumanism. So let's take a look at how humanism can still overcome selfishness and evil today. And the method we can use here, according to Nietzsche, is amor fati and the eternal recurrence. Now, amor fati is the idea of loving one's fate, loving one's life, fully accepting everything that has occurred to you in your past, not in a resentful way, not in a way which wishes to redefine or wishing things that didn't happen or wishing things that did happen. It is a full acceptance of your past self. And that full acceptance is going to allow you to see that everything that has happened in the past has brought you and made you into who you are today. So embrace and love yourself. Love everything that's happened to you. And do not wish it to be any different than it was. And that's the idea of amor fati. Now, the idea of eternal recurrence is to look at time not as linear, but to look at time as circular. And so the idea, according to Nietzsche, was we should be living our life in a way in which we would want to desire to live that life again and again and again. So it's not an actual reincarnation of lives, but it is a view of life that is very similar to Hinduism, in that we should be living life as if we were to live it again and again and again. And that's the idea of eternal recurrence. So let's take a look at the result of this. The result of humanism is that overcoming. And we can overcome this metaphorically, according to Nietzsche, using amor fati in the eternal recurrence. Or we can overcome this literally, according to transhumanism or post-humanism, with technology. And the result being that we achieve bliss and utter happiness and joy. So let's turn to the model that we're going to use to analyze humanism. So here again, we start with self and other. And the way that we're going to examine humanism is that metaphorical way, not that literal way yet, because that's dependent upon that technological singularity, which hasn't happened. That's a future hope of post-humanism. So here we're going to be dealing with humanism in a way in which we can overcome death and integrate self and other in a metaphorical sense. The way humanism does this is through a redefinition of self and a unification with other. First off, we need to redefine self. That's essentially at the root of humanism in whichever way we go, is we need a redefinition of self. So here, we're going to redefine self as human. And as such, if I am a part of humanity itself, then humanity is something that's going to continue on. And I can be a part of that species, and I can contribute to the species, because I'm not an individual isolated self. I am a human, and I am a human which is part of a greater species, and humanity will continue to live on forever and ever and ever. So that's the first way in which I'm going to overcome death. And now we need to integrate self and other. Again, we have a monism here, so there is just a oneness. But right now we have a two-ness, a self and other. So we need to find a way to overcome that, and it's a very similar way in which we've already done for ourselves. We're going to unify ourselves with other. And we'll use that same technique. It's not an other independent individual. That other is also human. That other is also the same as me. We are one. We are of the same substance. We are both human. We are both material. We are both part of this species. And as such, there is not two-ness here. There is oneness. We are human. There is a unification of other through a redefinition of self, a redefinition of other, and a continuation of life through the species. And so this is the basic model we're going to be using for humanism. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at how humanism is going to overcome the prisoner's dilemma of exchange, can fall down into self-destruction and hatred.